new gardeners haven't ever actually planted a seedling before and have a lot of questions about it. I'm Caleb Goossen, MOFGA's crop specialist, and I'm going to walk through planting a few different types of crops here today just to give you some pointers and some tips on how you might want to try it out. One thing to consider as you're getting ready to plant any garden crop is its growth habit and a little bit about its anatomy, if you will. So some of our crops, like parsley for instance, the growth point is always going to stay low. It's going to be almost buried under the soil, but you want to not bury it. You want to keep it above the soil line. Each one of these bits of new growth is actually an individual leaf that's coming up from a tightly compressed stem that never really elongates. So you're going to bury that about the same depth that it was in the pot. But if you have a basil plant or a tomato, these are ones that can be a touch more forgiving because the growth point on a basil is right up here, as well as a few other spots along the way where it's going to branch out. Ideally, your plant is small enough that you don't have to bury it deeper and that you still bury it at the same soil line it is in the pot. But if it's getting really tall and leggy, you can go up a little bit and you may get new rooting coming from the sides, depending on the species of plant. So lots of seedlings come in 4-packs like this or 6-packs. It's a nice, easy way to buy them from someone that does starts. If you noticed, I squeezed a little in both directions, just gently to loosen up the plastic, break sort of the connection that the roots have against the plastic. That helps loosen them up. It also helps to make sure they're well watered. Dry ones are going to have a harder time pulling out. And if it's grown well, as these were, you can see there's good, healthy white roots, and they have surrounded the outside, but not too much. Otherwise, it can become root bound. So this looks good. This is about what you're looking for. So a good, healthy root development is what you're looking for, and that's what we're seeing here. We've got nice white roots that shows that they're healthy, they're not suffering from disease, and they're encompassing most of that soil ball, that root ball. That's a good sign. It's starting to get a little overgrown at the bottom, but we can sort of just tease that out a little bit gently. It's okay to break some roots, but you don't want to do much damage. And with our greens, like this lettuce, the growth point is pretty low to the soil, so you don't want to plant it too deep. And you can also see a little bit where the seedling transitions from roots down at the bottom to a bit of a stem portion to the leafy portion. And that transition is about where you're going to want to make your planting line, the new soil line. So you can plant it a little deeper than it was because a little bit of that smaller part of the stem, sort of a rooting zone, it'll root itself, but you want most of the above ground part to remain above ground. And that's it. It's just that simple. We've got nice loosely prepared soil. We opened it up, made a spot for it, and put it in. Tamped it down because we want a little bit of soil contact. We don't want to compress too hard, and then we'll come in and water this after we're done. Taking plants out of these individual pots is going to be similar, although it's a little easier to work around it. You want to squeeze the sides. You want to make sure it's well watered so that it can slide out well. And then if it has a strong stem like that, you grab onto it low down and try to gently wiggle it. If you start to feel it separating from the roots, stop what you're doing. Turn the whole thing over and just try to get the bottom to release and fall into your hand. This one has a very strong, sturdy stem. I can tell that it's well connected to the roots, so I can just pull it up. As you can see, this root system is looking pretty healthy. Nice white roots, and it has already come out of the pot nicely, so we will just plant it in and try to keep that root ball together as best we can to avoid disturbing the roots any more than I already have. And after a little bit of watering in, that basil will be ready to go. Another consideration when planting seedlings is the spacing that they're going to need. Each one of these little chard is going to grow to a larger plant, and it's going to need access to water and fertility from the soil, as well as sunlight coming down from above. The closer they are, the more they're going to fight against each other to get those same resources. If you give them a little bit of space, they'll grow healthier, as well as be a little less susceptible to diseases. So I like to try to consider the full-grown plant, which I know is tricky if you're a new gardener, but just know that a chard plant, for instance, is going to be maybe 1.5 feet up to 2 feet tall, and probably 1 foot wide. So you're going to want to give them about 1 foot between each group of plants. If we loosen these seedlings from the 4-pack here, luckily they're all cooperating and they all came out at once. You can consider your spacing before you even plant them. And that gives you a little time to think about it and rearrange if need be. Right now these are about 1 foot apart, and that's going to give chard plenty of space to grow between the groups of plants that are going in. Another way to think about it, if you know the size of your hand, that helps become a nice ruler. I know that from my thumb to my pinky is about 8 inches, and half of that again is about another 4 inches, so that's about 1 foot apart. And the more you do it, the more you train your eye to just know what that spacing is going to be. And similar to our other discussion about where to plant for depth, these chard are showing very nicely that this is root tissue down here at the bottom. That can all go underground. The leaves don't start until up here, and those can go above the surface of the soil, and the growing point will be above the soil surface, the leaves above the soil surface, and we just tuck in that root tissue and the root ball and water it in, and it should be good to go. If you're wanting to plant from direct seeding with seeds that you put into the soil yourself, there's a few things to keep in mind. The first is whether you have a cool season crop, which is going to do well in cooler soils, or if you have a warm season crop, and if it's going to need a warmer soil in order to germinate well. The other one has a lot to do with the seed size. A smaller seeded crop, it doesn't have as much energy to get a sprout all the way up through a lot of soil, so you have to plant that a little shallower. Whereas a larger seeded crop like these beans can go down a bit deeper. A bean like this could go down as far as 1 inch, 1.5 inches maybe. And then you're, again, just like if you were putting out a transplant, you're going to want to think of the size of the full-grown plant and bring that into consideration with your spacing. You can always seed denser and thin them out later, but you can never seed them closer than you wanted them to be. So with beans, it could be as simple as laying them out every few inches and pressing them into the soil, coming back over to smooth it over and watering them in. Another option would have been to make a little bit of a trench first and seed them individually and just cover up that trench, close it up. Either way, as long as you take into consideration the soil temperature, the seeding depth, and making sure that you're providing enough water without providing too much water, you should be good to go. In a few days, depending on the type of crop, you'll be seeing sprouts come up. So as you plant your new seedlings, remember that different crops all grow a little bit differently depending on their species. Some growth points are closer to the soil and you're not going to want to bury those. Some of them are higher up and they give you a little more leeway. But when in doubt, look up each individual crop you're going to plant. As you pull your seedlings out of the plastic pot or however you're getting them, remember, be gentle, try not to damage those roots. Check for root health. That's another good time to look at the stem of the plant and see a rooting section or an above ground section, and that helps you know where to plant it as you're putting it into the ground. Then, another thing to consider with these different crops is how big will they get when they're fully mature, and use that to help you guide your spacing considerations. You don't want them to be too tight, they'll struggle, they'll compete with each other, and they may be more susceptible to disease. If you plant them too far apart, you're losing some of that valuable space for vegetables in your garden. One last tip, if you're doing some direct seeding, you can use the width of the seed to help you think about the depth at which to plant it. A very small seed, you want to plant it just maybe 1.5 times that depth. Same for a large seed, which means a large seed can go quite a bit deeper. Hopefully these tips will help you in planting your brand new garden. Best of luck to you in your growing endeavor.